Welcome to Create More Intimacy, a podcast for men. I'm Elisa Stoddard, and I help successful men stop chasing sex and start building real connection so they finally feel close, connected, and wanted again. A lot of men reach a point in midlife where something in their relationship feels off, but they don't immediately understand what they're actually noticing. They've spent years doing what they believed mattered most: working hard, carrying responsibility, raising kids, staying focused on what needed to get done. And because of that, they often assume that once life becomes less demanding, the closeness will naturally return. They think when there is finally more room and less chaos, fewer demands, the relationship will start to feel easier again. But for a lot of couples, that is exactly when the distance becomes harder to ignore. The kids need less. The house is quieter. Life is more stable. And yet, instead of naturally feeling close again, many couples find themselves sitting in the same room, living side by side, talking mostly about logistics and wondering why the relationship still feels flat. What many men do not realize is that somewhere along the way, life became organized almost entirely around responsibility and very little around the skill of creating connection. That is not because they don't care, and it's not because they have bad intentions. It's because many men know how to perform, provide, solve problems, and even create impressive experiences, but they have never really learned what it means to be a good friend as an adult to another man and especially to the woman they married. So they reach for what makes sense to them. They plan a trip or buy something generous, arrange a nice dinner, spend money in ways that feel meaningful to him. But those gestures quietly carry an expectation that the effort should create closeness, appreciation, and, let's be honest, maybe even sex. And when it does not work that way, they feel confused, disappointed, sometimes even rejected, without realizing that their relationship may actually be missing something far less dramatic and far more personal than a big gesture. It may simply be that they do not yet know how to create regular, relaxed, mutual connection anymore. Welcome to episode 46, Why Life Feels Flat in Midlife, Even When Nothing is Wrong. A lot of this becomes more obvious in midlife because earlier in adulthood, many men were surrounded by structures that made connection easier without requiring much thought from them. There were built-in friendships through work, school, young kids, sports, family activities, neighborhood life, and the natural momentum of raising a family. Life itself kept people connected enough that many men did not have to think very hard about how friendships were maintained or how a shared life was intentionally created. But midlife exposes that. The kids get older and schedules open up. Family life no longer forces the same kind of togetherness, and suddenly many couples find themselves with more freedom but less connection than they expected. That is often when a man starts realizing that work is still familiar, responsibility is still clear, but knowing how to create enjoyable connection feels much less natural than he assumed it would. And if he's not especially comfortable in his own skin, if suggesting plans feels awkward, if reaching out to another couple feels uncertain, if thinking of something enjoyable to do does not come naturally, he often defaults to waiting. He waits for his wife to decide what they should do on a Saturday. He waits for someone else to invite them somewhere. He waits for connection to happen without recognizing that adult relationships usually need someone willing to create that momentum. That waiting can look harmless because nothing dramatic is happening, but years can pass inside that pattern. And while he may not mean to withdraw, his wife often experiences something very different. She experiences a man who knows how to work hard and who may deeply care, but who brings very little personal energy into creating a shared life now that life is no longer building it for them. The same pattern usually shows up in a man's friendships too, even if he has not thought much about it. A lot of men still think they have friends because there are people that they know, people they text occasionally, people they would gladly talk to if they ran into them. But when you look more closely, many of those relationships are very thin. They're tied to history or work or a shared hobby, occasional contact, but they are not relationships he's actively helping to maintain. I was talking with a client recently who realized that when he looked at the people he spent time with, most of those relationships had a built-in reason for existing: business or shared history, convenience, church. But very few had continued because he had intentionally helped build them over time. And sometimes what looks like friendship is actually proximity more than friendship. A man may golf regularly with a client, but part of what keeps that going is business. The relationship has a built-in reason to exist. The same thing often happens when the kids were young. There were other couples around because your children were in the same schools or the same sport, the same neighborhood, the same activities. Plans happened because life kept putting people together. But many of those relationships were never fully cultivated outside of the convenience that created them. So when those structures disappear, a lot of men don't just lose contact. They realize they never fully developed the habit of building friendships intentionally in the first place. Earlier in life, that mattered far less because daily life itself kept putting people together. But by midlife, friendships usually stop sustaining themselves unless someone deliberately keeps them alive. That means someone has to text first. Someone has to suggest getting together. Someone has to say, hey, we should grab dinner or let's go golfing. Come over and watch the game or let's get our wives together and do something. And a lot of men do not naturally step in to that friendship as an adult. And it's not because they don't want the connection, they do. It is because they've spent many years living inside routines where work felt clear and social effort felt unnecessary and maybe awkward or easy to postpone. So they tell themselves they're just busy, or they assume that other people are busy too. Or they think that friendship should happen naturally if it really mattered. And what often happens instead is that their world gets smaller and smaller without them fully noticing it. Sure, they still function, they still go to work, and they still handle life. But there are far fewer conversations that are easy and far fewer moments of laughter and shared experiences with your kids, fewer relationships where they feel relaxed rather than needed. And that matters more than many men realize, because when a man has no meaningful friendships outside his marriage, he often places pressure on the marriage without understanding he's doing it. His wife becomes the only place he looks for emotional ease, companionship, validation, shared experience, and relief from stress. And that is a heavy role for one relationship to carry, especially if she already has friendships and interests and ways of feeling connected that don't depend entirely on him. So while he may quietly feel lonely, he often does not name the loneliness. He just experiences life as flat, less engaging, less alive than he used to feel, and often assumes the marriage itself is the entire reason, when sometimes part of what is missing is that he has stopped participating in the kind of friendships that help a person stay emotionally awake, and his confidence suffers. What often happens next is that without anyone fully talking about it, the wife becomes the person carrying most of the relational energy in the marriage. She's the one who suggests getting together with friends. She notices which couples they have not seen in a while. She reaches out and makes plans. She remembers birthdays. She thinks ahead about holidays and dinners and trips and what might actually make life feel enjoyable. And after enough years, that role can start to feel heavier than either person realizes. Because what may look small on the surface, deciding what to do this weekend, inviting another couple over, suggesting they go somewhere together, is often carrying something much bigger underneath it. She's not just planning. She's often trying to keep life from becoming emotionally flat herself, trying to create moments where the relationship feels alive, where conversation happens more easily, where there is something shared beyond routines and responsibilities. What many men miss is that when she has to keep doing that alone, it changes how she experiences him. And it's not because she needs him to be constantly entertaining, but because she wants to feel that he has some personal energy too, some ideas, some curiosity, some willingness to help create a life they both live inside. And when that's missing, a woman can slowly begin to feel like she's living beside someone who is dependable, but increasingly hard to engage. What often looks passive to him, maybe easygoing, flexible, fine with whatever, does not always feel that way to her. Over time, it can start to feel a lot like he's disinterested, like he's willing to come along if she creates the plan, but rarely brings much personal desire, thought, or initiative of his own. And when that happens year after year, she often adapts in ways he doesn't immediately understand. She puts more of that energy into her own friendships, her own interests, her own routines, maybe her adult kids or grandkids. And not necessarily because she's pulling away from him intentionally, but because it feels easier to invest where there's already movement and shared engagement. Because if she is always the one thinking ahead and making the calls, suggesting what they do, deciding who to invite, deciding how life keeps moving, well, eventually it can begin to feel easier emotionally to stop hoping he'll step into that role. And once she stops expecting much from him there, he often mistakes that for peace. But many times it's not peace, it's an adjustment. She has simply learned where to place her energy. What many men do not realize is that a woman is often deeply affected by whether her husband seems interested in life with her, not just being present inside of it. She does not need him to become someone else, but she does want to feel his presence, his thoughtfulness, his ideas, his willingness to help create something between them. Part of why this happens is that many men naturally reach for what feels measurable when something in the relationship feels uncertain. If closeness feels off, they look for something that they can do, something clear, something visible, something that feels like effort that they can point to, something that's measurable. And that's why planning a trip, or buying something thoughtful, or arranging a dinner, or creating some bigger experience often makes immediate sense to them. Those things feel concrete. They're measurable. They know when it's done. They know what they've contributed. They know they've made an effort. And for men who have spent much of their life solving problems through action, that instinct is 100% understandable. The difficulty is that relationships often respond differently than work does. At work, visible effort usually produces visible results. In marriage, visible effort can still miss if what's absent is harder to measure. Because friendship inside a marriage is built less through occasional effort and more through repeated signs that a man is emotionally participating with her. That may mean noticing what sounds enjoyable before she has to suggest it, thinking ahead about who they enjoy being with, having ideas that are not attached to obligation, bringing conversation that is not only about what has to get done. And that is exactly why some men feel frustrated when a generous gesture doesn't seem to change very much. From their perspective, they acted. But from her perspective, what often matters more is whether he's becoming more relational in ordinary life, not simply more impressive in isolated moments. Yes, a trip can be lovely, a gift can be meaningful, but neither teaches a couple how to enjoy each other on a regular Tuesday when nothing special is happening. And that is usually where closeness either strengthens or quietly weakens over time. What often changes this is not personality. It's not becoming more outgoing or social or suddenly turning into something completely different. It's learning that at this stage of life, connection usually has to become intentional in ways it didn't earlier. A man who wants life to feel less flat and less lonely, less emotionally disconnected, often has to stop waiting for connection to appear and start recognizing where he has more influence than he thought. That may mean asking himself simple questions he's not asked in years. What do we actually enjoy doing together now? Who do we feel good around? Who have we not seen in far too long? What would feel good to suggest this weekend instead of waiting to be told? Because this is not really about becoming socially impressive. It's about becoming more present inside your own life, more willing to bring thought, preference, and initiative instead of assuming someone else will naturally carry that part. And this matters outside the marriage too. A man who reaches out to another man and suggests lunch, sends a text, invites somebody to do something, is not doing something small. He is pushing against a pattern that easily becomes isolation in midlife. The same is true inside marriage. When a husband starts bringing ideas, not extravagant ideas, just simple, thoughtful movement, it often changes more than he expects. And let me be clear, not every suggestion is perfect. But because that initiative communicates something deeper, it communicates interest, it communicates presence. It communicates that he is not just occupying the relationship, he's bringing something into the relationship that was missing before. And often that is what begins making a woman feel him differently again. And it's not because he suddenly became romantic. It's because he became engaged, because he stopped living as if connection should just magically somehow happen automatically. And he started understanding that good relationships, even long-term ones, need someone who is willing to continually build them. For a lot of men, this becomes one of those things that they do not fully notice until years have passed. They're not in a terrible marriage. Nothing dramatic has fallen apart. They are still functioning and showing up, still doing what needs to be done. And yet there's this kind of quiet disappointment that starts settling in because life does not feel as warm and connected or alive as they thought it would at this stage. What makes this different is that many men assume the answer must be something bigger, some big change is needed, some big conversation, some big fix. But often, what changes the emotional tone of a life is much smaller and much more consistent than that. It's whether you remain someone who is still participating, still bringing thought, still bringing interest, still willing to risk the small awkwardness of whether you stay emotionally available enough to keep participating in the life around you when nothing around you forces that to happen. Because midlife can quietly train people into passivity if they're not paying attention. Routines become very familiar and weeks move quickly. And without deciding to otherwise, a man can slowly become someone who mostly reacts to life instead of helping to create it. That affects marriage more than you know. It affects whether friendships stay alive. It affects whether home feels engaging or emotionally flat. It affects whether your wife experiences you as someone who is still curious about a life with her, or mostly someone who comes along when asked. It doesn't require constant planning, endless socialization, or pretending to be naturally outgoing if that's not who you are. It does require that you recognize that closeness, friendship, and a shared life usually do not keep growing on their own at this stage. Someone has to help build them. And if you've been waiting for life to feel better on its own, or waiting for your relationship to somehow return to what it once was, without much changing, it may be worth asking yourself whether what's missing is not love, but intention. Because often the men who feel the most lonely are not men who have no one around them. They are men who slowly stopped knowing how to participate relationally in the life they already have. And that's a skill that can absolutely be learned again. Take care. We'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. If something in this episode hit home, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps more men find the support they need. And if you are ready to get help or take the next step, you'll find the link to book a free call in the show notes. I'll see you next time.